Welcome to an introduction for a concert that's going to take place at the Peabody School of Music in Baltimore. Timothy Hoft, I think a very remarkable pianist, is going to devote a concert to piano music by Ukrainian composers. As you know, Ukraine is much in the news now, and it has a rather strong musical tradition. So we are going to explore that program that he's going to make. So we'll talk a little bit about each piece, and he will illustrate a little bit from it. And you will be given, as part of this video, instructions of where it's going to take place, at what time, and the program itself. So without further ado, I need to add one thing. I think, at least in the Western Hemisphere, Timothy Hoft got really interested in Ukrainian piano music. And I can say with absolute security that I don't know any American pianist or any Canadian pianist that has learned as much Ukrainian repertoire as he has. He's crazy, in other words. There's not much sense in him, but there's a great deal of beauty and in the fact that he's willing to take this on. And I hope you will find it interesting, satisfying, and intriguing as well. So, Tim, first of all, you put this program together. I had nothing to do with it except maybe handing you a few things.
Yes.
So tell me what you decided to do and why.
Well, I decided that I wanted to make a recital of living composers because I've played many concerts before, as you know, of Ukrainian music, including Shchetynsky and Kalachevsky and Kosenko, and composers of the past. And since Ukraine is going through a difficult time right now, I thought the best way to support them is to actually support musicians who are alive right now. So that was my first idea, and the second idea was just to find some music that you had given me several years ago that I had interest in but just never got around to. And I wanted it to be kind of a hodgepodge program, not something that was centered around a large work like a Silvestrov sonata or your symphony or something like that. I wanted them all to be more or less short pieces, so that it's just sort of an a la carte kind of a program. So the first piece on the program is Cascades by Alla Zahaikevych. You'll have to help me.
Well, it's Zahaikevych, but the problem is
Zahaikevych. Yeah.
Zahaikevych. Yeah. The problem with that is, just a little lesson. Ukrainian has an H sound, h. Yeah. Russian doesn't. So when these people became known, they started using the Russian translation because that's the way it was given to Europeans. Mm-hmm. So the G should be an H, and that's how she pronounces this. But it's the difference between a hard H, what they call, which is G, and a soft H, which is ha, like house.
Yes.
Okay, go.
So I'll play just a little bit of the beginning.
Yeah.
Cascades. And that's just how it opens. And it goes on a bit like that. It always has this sort of I know you don't like the word gesture, but there's a lot of gestures in this. Not a lot of melodies, but it actually is a great title for the piece, I think, Cascades.
Yeah, well, yes,
it reminds me of, waves and winds and
right.
Nature effects.
It's a kind of sounds also, not exactly, of course, but the kind of sounds that you hear sometimes in Messiaen.
Yeah.
Which is a sort of imitation of natural sounds. I think it's quite enchanting. I think it works very well.
Yeah.
So that'll open the program.
Yes.
And what did you decide to follow it?
Well, I thought because this piece has a lot of virtuosity, a lot of flash, it would be a good opener. And then after it, I'd play Rythmos by Lyubava Sydorenko. And correct me if I pronounced her name.
Sydorenko.
Sydorenko. Okay.
Sydorenko. Yeah.
Lyubava
Sydorenko. Yeah.
Yeah. So this has a more lyrical approach, although the second piece is rather rhythmic, like Stravinsky. But I was really enchanted by the opening of the first piece the first time I heard it. I remember you sent me a recording of somebody playing it, and there's just something about the pace and the phrasing of it that really captured me from the first listening. And so I just wanted to try it myself and see if others have the same reaction. So here is Rythmos, and this is just the opening of the first movement.
Oh, it's quite lovely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is a lovely
yeah.
piece. Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
It's
So
interesting.
that has three movements.
Yes.
First one in the middle and another one to end fast.
Yeah, sort of like two impressionistic-like outer movements, and then a more rhythmic one in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the next one I think you're going to do is Bohdana Frolyak.
Yes.
Now, I have to tell you this little story. When I talked to her about that, a couple of years back, that you wanted to do this, and she says, well, I don't have much piano music. I got a lot of chamber and this and that, but not my... I said, well, just give me what you got. And then I, sent it to you.
Mm-hmm. Which is
So
just
which
two
one
pieces.
did you choose? What?
I chose both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the titles are funny. The first one is simply called Stück, which just means piece, and then the second one is Kurz, which means short,
Sure.
which is what it is. It's a short piece. So I decided just to play both of them, and I play the short one after the longer one. I kind of feel like they go together in a way. They both have the same kind of rhythmic drive, the same kind of language. The first one is a little bit more like Stravinsky, I'd say, and the second one a little bit more like Messiaen. But still, I think they kind of go together. I kind of just programmed the second one sort of like a coda to the first one.
Stück Kurz.
Yeah.
Rather than the Kurzstück.
Right. So it's very dissonant, very aggressive music, and again, it was I put it third on the program to contrast with the lyricism of the previous one. So here's how it starts. Yeah, so it continues and it develops from there, and it has a very rhythmic and virtuosic sense to it. Not easy to play, very uncomfortable, as you could see. There's a lot of hands on top of each other, and yeah, it can be a real pain to play. But
well, maybe her feeling about the piano. I know she's married to a pianist, a very, very good pianist. So maybe she decided to take vengeance on the pianist and made it as clumsy as possible. I've done that. So next, what do you have?
For Elisa by Hrabovsky. And he is the oldest composer on the program. Most of the composers were born in the 70s or 60s, but Hrabovsky is in his 80s now. I forget when he was born. I think early 1930s.
In 1944,
Yeah, yeah. So
around then.
you introduced me to Hrabovsky a couple of times. I saw him in New York once, and then he came to Las Vegas. And I recorded his 5 character pieces, as you know, and so he came here and helped me with those pieces. And we talked a little bit about his music and a few other things, and he told me a little bit about this piece, that it was written for a pianist with extremely small hands.
Yeah, that was my ex-wife, Lisa
Right.
Stutz. Yes.
Yeah, with very small
Yes.
hands, but a tremendous amount of musicality.
Yeah,
Um,
and right, and you know, what we did was, this was the time when we started being able to work with composers from Ukraine. This was in the late '80s during Glasnost, and so we commissioned him. We asked him, because she was doing a Merkin Hall recital in New York, and she wanted a premiere, world premiere, and that's how it started.
Yeah, so this piece, it's rather hard to describe. It's very contrapuntal. It's very slow, kind of hauntingly beautiful is how I describe it. The counterpoint, it actually reminds me a little bit of like your Fifth Nocturnal, where there are many different lines going on independent of each other. And like that piece, he also writes it in 4 staves. And an interesting choice. The clefs he used are treble clef, bass clef, treble clef, bass clef. Right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand. So staves 1 and 3 have to be played with your right hand, and 2 and 4 with your left hand, which, as you can imagine, is incredibly annoying to learn at the very beginning. But after working on it just about 30 minutes or so, the logic is undeniable. It was absolutely written in that way for a purpose, and it's actually not that hard once you get used to it. Once you remember which hand you're reading and which clef you're reading. I find it really fascinating. It's not a piece I'm sure I want to try to describe, but rather just allow people to hear it in their own way. So I'll just play a little bit of it.
Yeah, I mean, we like the piece. I think the piece is it's a mature piece for him. I mean, he's written lots of music, but not much piano music, except a cycle of 3 very long pieces called Homeomorphios, which I think we're going to tackle on next.
Well, you were saying I was very crazy before.
Yeah, well, you got to live up to your reputation.
Yeah, if I learn that, I will definitely live up to my reputation.
Yeah. Well, I promise to pay for your psychiatrist.
The one thing I will say about his music is I find that his music, although it may not be completely understandable on the first listening, it feels very, very strong, nevertheless. And I get that impression from a lot of great composers like Pierre Boulez, for example, where you kind of you get the sense that there's a very, very logical and structured and intelligent approach to the piece. and that it will reveal itself to you eventually if you give it time. That's all I'll put it.
Don't disagree.
Yep.
Don't disagree. So then, after that,
Bezborodko, and it's funny. The title of the piece, I wrote to him recently and asked if he could say anything about the piece. And the English translation that he gives is Three Displaced Desires. But in an earlier version of the score, I noticed he wrote Three Repressed Desires. And then in his email, he said, I suppose Three Repressed Desires is a better translation. It's more Freudian. So, and I agreed that it feels more natural in English. So I'll probably just change the title to Three Repressed Desires.
well, I mean, I think it's a question. The word in Ukrainian may have its own associations, and the word in English has slightly different associations, because repressed means more internal. Displaced is something that you, rather than doing this, you do this. So in that sense, it's a little different. But I'm not quite sure what the title means for these pieces, but that might be an interesting sort of conundrum as to why he called them that even.
Mm-hmm. I was a little I was a little confused about the title at first, but actually working through it, it actually does make perfect sense. The first piece is simply a very nervous piece. It has some sort of internal nervous energy. There's some of that in the second movement as well, although that has more of a impressionistic feel in a way. And then the third movement, he added a subtitle to it in his second version of the piece and named it Etude Elegy, which I think is a very interesting title. It's a very virtuosic piece. It always has running scales throughout the entire piece. And it does have sort of a darkness to it, even though it winds up in C major. The whole thing is basically in C major, but there's a lot of C minor and modal qualities to it.
He's a very good pianist himself, by the way.
Yeah, he is.
Very, very good.
Yeah, he plays all of his own music, and I know he plays a lot of Shchetynsky's music as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, he plays a lot of different. He's been playing Silvestrov, and he did a whole concert of Shchetinsky music, which I heard, which is very good. Very good playing.
Yeah.
Very good. Very talented young man, I think.
Yeah, and I told him as well by email that I really appreciated the way that he notated this, the way he engraved it. And in the third movement especially, he puts a lot of really, really intelligent fingerings, fingerings that you would not think of at first, alternate fingerings to C major scales and so forth. That at first seem like it's just wrong, but actually there is a purpose to it.
There's a reason for it, yeah.
It works out really, really well. Yeah. This is the beginning of Three Repressed Desires. So that's how it begins.
Okay.
Yeah. Very tricky to play as well.
Yeah, I mean, you could see, but it's also very pianistic, so
Yeah.
it works well. All right, now then we're going to, I think, Yurina, right?
Yes.
Ludmila Yurina. She's in
And-
Stanford now.
Yes, yes. She has 3 pieces for piano, but I only had time to program one of them, so I chose the one that I thought was the flashiest, which is Shadows and Ghosts. And she wrote to me a little bit about the piece. Let me find that email from her really quickly, because it is interesting. She said it was written in Germany. She was wandering in the space of a dark and half-empty house with a lantern. Experiments with different gradations of darkness and shadows inspired me to create a piece in which sounds would reproduce the atmosphere of gloom and mystery. So again, the title it's rather straightforward and just tells you what it's about. I also wanted to play this one because it's the only piece on the program that has some extended techniques, muting of the strings inside the piano and so forth. So I'll play just the opening of this one. So hopefully that comes through in the recording, but there's a lot of harmonic resonance from holding down the notes to create that ghostly effect.
Yeah. That's something we may have to work in with post-production. It wasn't coming through here very well, but that doesn't mean anything.
Right. It should come through the microphone.
Yeah. And then we go to the last composer.
Yes.
Good friend of mine, Oleksandr Shchetynsky.
And so after the audience has been thoroughly terrified of shadows and ghosts, I decided to end the program with something much nicer sounding. And I programmed this for a couple of reasons. I've been interested in the piece for a long time, actually. He gave me the music himself when I was in Kiev several years ago. And it's very unlike his other pieces, which are very dissonant. This one is extremely diatonic and very modal. And he told me in an email that there's a lot of medieval qualities to it. It's meant to sound like medieval music, which I got immediately from playing it. He didn't even have to tell me that. And the piece is in 4 movements. It's called Kharkiv music, named after the city Kharkiv. In eastern Ukraine. And although it wasn't really my intention to make this program a political statement, this was, as with every time I've played Ukrainian music in the past, it's more just been of a musical exploration for me. I thought now it might be appropriate to put in a piece named Kharkiv music, in memory and in solidarity of the city, which has been just destroyed by the Russians. So in an email exchange with him, he told me that he wrote it in the 1980s, and it was meant to be a kind of protest against the Soviet Union because of the horrific living conditions at that time, and so that's why the piece is so pretty sounding. That's why it's so diatonic. And he said, I suppose the title would indicate that maybe the piece might mean something differently to ears in 2022. So I think he sort of anticipated the reason why I chose it. And so it's meant to be a tribute to those suffering in eastern Ukraine right now. But I also thought that the piece would end the program nicely because it would feel like such a sigh of relief after all of the dissonant and aggressive pieces that I played before it. So I'll play just the opening of the first movement. etc.
That definitely has what I would call a sort of ethnographic feel to it. In the sense that the tune does sound like a Ukrainian tune in a way. I mean, it's a very hard thing to distinguish from other Slavic tunes, but at the same time, there's a certain kind of intervallic playings with the melody that are very typical of East Ukraine, particularly. So, just as parting thing, can you kind of give your sense of what this program tells about Ukrainian music, piano music specifically, of the younger generation for the most part, that born in the 60s and 70s, which may not seem that old, that young, but nevertheless, in musical terms, it tends to be. How do you see it?
Well, I wanted to create a program that had as much variety as possible, not just for the listening experience, but also to show that there is a great deal of variety, which there is within Ukrainian music. You can't pinpoint it down to a single style. Even the two most famous composers, Stankovich and Silvestrov, their styles are wildly different from each other. So I'm hoping that this will spark some interest in some young minds, and that they will hear this program and be inspired to explore music of their own generation. Yep.
I think that makes a nice period for this whole thing. Thank you very much, Tim. Indeed.
Thank you, Virko.
And
that's just how it all. Yeah, so it continues. So that's how it begins.